We shot the film in Jordan, and we used ex-Marines to be in the film and people who'd served in Iraq. So it was a mixture of them actually bringing their experiences and what they'd been through when they were in the war to the film. And we wanted to make it as real as possible. So we actually built barracks for them to live in, and they lived just as Marines. They didn't kind of retreat to the Holiday Inn in the evenings. They lived in the barracks, and they got up in the morning and they put a uniform on. Some of them were a bit out of condition when we started the film, so we trained them. We got them to do PT. We got them running around. We got them back into that whole sort of mental discipline thing of being a Marine. And it brought back a lot of their memories, I think, of having served in Iraq. And I put this scene in because I wanted the sort of reality of them to really be in the film. This guy, for example, Nate, he's re-enlisted in the Marines. He's going back to fight in Iraq again because I think he found it so hard not fighting. And he kind of just he was really into killing, and he just loved being a Marine. He couldn't believe he was being paid to kill people. So he was the most extreme example. Elliot, for example, was somebody who was badly injured in Tikrit when he was fighting over there, and really felt that the war was ridiculous and the Americans should get out of Iraq, and is more kind of like a part of almost the anti-war movement, and felt very badly let down by the Marines who didn't really want to cover his medical bills and stuff for his injuries. So, and the story was inspired by real events. It was inspired by this article that came out in Time magazine, and we also did a lot of interviews with Marines who had been there that day from Kilo Company, and they told us a lot of background stuff, what they were up to, what it was like being in Haditha. And one of the things they used to do was do a kind of Humvee races across the desert. They'd have different platoons, and they would actually bet on who's gonna win these races. And they got kind of they're scarily dangerous, actually, because you can never tell in the desert where there's going to be a big dip or a boulder or a sort of sudden kind of ravine. But the Marines really all got off on that sort of adrenaline and craziness, although they all accused me of trying to kill them when we were shooting the scene. They at a certain point got actually frightened of what we were doing, but it was fun, and I was actually surprised how cautious a lot of the time the Marines were. They'd sort of do something and then get frightened about it afterwards, and then they were always quite frightened that someone was going to take a pot shot at them even in Jordan. I don't think they could tell that much difference between Jordan and being in Iraq. And the places look identical. They're only about they're right on the border to each other. And this particular area is right on the border with Iraq, and it looks just like Haditha. It's sort of very rocky. The only vegetation you get is actually by the river Euphrates. And I think for the Marines it was like, why aren't we being shot at all the time? But I think it made their performances very, very real. Originally, we were going to get an American actor, quite a well-known one, to play the part of Elliot, but it didn't work out that well. Elliot was such an amazingly convincing actor that we ended up giving him the main part of Ramirez and expanding his part. So this is actually Jarash in Jordan, It's an ancient old Roman town on the road to Damascus that it really hasn't changed over the centuries. In fact, this town was bigger when it was Roman than it is now, and it's literally built from the stones from the Roman ruins. And there were so many battles in this town. The Crusaders were here, and the Saracens were here. It's always been it's in the Middle East. It's always been amazingly full of conflict, and it's very traditional too. And this woman here is an Iraqi. They were a family of 10 that we managed to cast. That's her son down there. They were refugees from Iraq. They'd lost a son-in-law and other members of their family. They were actually a family of 12. And we met them just by chance. We found them in one of the communities near Amman. And this is Falah. He's a well-known Iraqi actor, actually, who is probably the best known of the actors we have in the film. He worked with Kevin Spacey in the Old Vic in London. He's very well known in Iraq. And he also helps a lot of the other people out with their parts and their acting. But he was a very dependable actor and really had a great sense of humor and was fantastic to work with. He also was still living in Baghdad, so he knew the troubles and was very, very... I think he brought a lot of reality to the film as well.
Surrender their freedom. Democracy will succeed because the United States of America will not be intimidated by a bunch of thugs.
The one thing the Iraqis all had in common was they hated Bush. They regarded him as a monster, as a man who had come to take their country away from them, and I think they were particularly upset that the reconstruction of Iraq was all done by American companies. No Iraqis were actually involved in it, and it just looked like a sort of American money-making exercise. And the people in Jordan, I think, on the whole, really felt for the Iraqis, who were very pro-Iraqi. This guy here is Iraqi too. He was a member of the football team. He'd never acted before. And he was a kind of jokey sidekick for Falah as the other insurgent. I remember this scene we shot probably for a whole morning because he could never remember his lines. And he would always change. One of the things with non-actors is they change their performance each time, or just throw completely new lines in every time you do it. So we were just endlessly reshooting this scene because we could never actually build on it. And one of the things Falah taught was to, give a kind of repeat your performance so that one can actually develop the performance. Here they are. They're going to in this scene here. They're going to pick up the IED bomb from the insurgents, and I had no idea, for example, how to operate an IED bomb, and it's a very particular kind of bomb. And I knew that a number of the Iraqis that we were casting had fought in Iraq with the insurgency, so I gathered them all together and I said, can anyone here, I don't know how to do an IED, can anyone here really describe how to operate an IED and how to trigger it and that sort of thing? And about 5 of these guys who you see in this scene sort of put their hands up and then looked very sheepish about the fact they knew how to do it. And this guy that you see here with the red bandana, which is one of the colors of Jordan, he had obviously made IDs before, and he had 4 brothers who had been killed in Fallujah, which was the sort of one of the major battles in Iraq. And he just gave this explanation, totally, really unscripted by me. So it was an amazing piece of improvisation. I mean, he just explains it perfectly. Most of the IEDs, in fact, are triggered by cell phones, and so that I guess the bombers can stand some distance away, in order to get away when the bomb goes off. And he just gave this explanation. It's almost done. I think we shot it pretty much all in one take. Which is a way I like to work, actually. I think, one of the fantastic things about cinema is it can show things in real time, and you don't need to keep cutting from close-ups to and cut the action up. I think things feel so much more real when you let them play out a bit, and if you can get the action to be strong enough, I think you can sustain scenes quite long. You don't need to keep cutting to, keep people's interest so much. And obviously it helps, when you have people who really know what they're doing. Like in this scene, they all really knew, what one would do if one was going out to plant an IED. So it just happened very, very, very naturally, actually. It's interesting, too, that in the insurgency in Haditha, this guy here is a sort of fundamentalist. He would have been a foreign fighter who came to Haditha. Haditha was originally, the insurgency was all from Saddam's army. And they were kind of quite moderate men. They were guys who had families, and they regarded themselves as patriots. They were really against the Americans. Largely, I think, actually, when the Americans cancelled free elections and then gave all their contracts out to American companies, I think that's when people stopped believing in the Americans as liberators and regarded them as occupiers. And when the Americans then got rid of the Iraqi army, they just sort of fired them all, and there were 600,000 people out of work. They then formed the insurgency. And it's only when they later they ran out of money, that Al-Qaeda and so on came in and started funding the insurgency. So the insurgency became much more sort of fundamentalist as the war progressed. And this is Elliot again playing Ramirez. He did come from Philadelphia. And what he says here is really about him and his reasons for joining the American Army, or joining the Marines in particular. His father had been in the Marines before him. But they were really good, these guys, at improvising, and I think because they were all living together in these barracks, they kind of really got into it. And often I could just go in and film without even setting things up too much. So we were able to film in quite a sort of relaxed way. These barracks were, in fact, part of a school in Jerash, and we then sort of built this whole camp here. We built the tower. We had an amazing art designer who did all this work. Dave, who also worked a lot with Michael Winterbottom. And this is, we used to drive these Humvees around Jerash all the time. This was actually an accident that happened. We would just happen to be filming it. And, the guy just whacked his gun against a passing vehicle. And we had a number of accidents with Humvees driving into cars and that kind of thing. And some of the Marines were almost going to sleep on the wheel, that sort of crazy stuff. This is actually a separate location from Jerash. It's much closer to the Iraqi border in a more deserty area where we were filming. It was an area, in fact, where there was an enormous lake at one point, and there used to be massive amounts of wildlife in this area, and then all the water was used to give water to Oman and that sort of thing, and the whole place is just now kind of this big stony place without any water at all. And oddly enough, lots of Armenians live here who had I guess originally come from Armenia in the 1900s. So it's a kind of very curious place to film. And it's also a place where all the trucks coming through to Iraq, they would all come through this town. So it's just a kind of strange place where all these truck convoys would come 2 or 3 times a week, bringing food and stuff into Iraq. A lot of the truck drivers were sort of taken out by insurgents on the way in. So, but it's weird what war produces. Again, these were all Iraqi kids that were living nearby that we put in the film. These two just happened to turn up on the day. And the Marines again did exactly what they would do at the roadblocks. This is, their procedure. I would generally let them show me through a particular scene, how they would do it, and then we'd sort of work a bit together to sort of make sure that it kind of fitted in with the story that I was telling. But it's an interesting way of working, and it's great because the Marines could really be themselves, I think, and bring themselves to the film rather than feeling that they were acting parts and that sort of thing.
Away from the door?
Yes.
بعد شوي على الباب.
Vehicle good?
Tom, hurry up. يلا بسرعة اطلع بسرعة.
And this joke that you're about to hear was a joke that Falah... It was one of Falah's jokes. It was just one of the kind of jokes that goes around in Iraq about the Americans. I think there was, there's a whole... It's rather like the Polish jokes or the kind of Irish jokes from here. It's like all their jokes about the Americans, how stupid the Americans are. And there's sort of... These jokes sort of circulate a lot around the Iraqi community. And Falah was very funny. He was actually somebody who had acted a lot in comedies and stuff, and had a really infectious laugh. So he was a great storyteller, and eventually became great friends with the Marines, actually. So this is the house where the family were actually living. Again, like the Marines, they actually lived in this house. And this was an early warning scene that we just happened to film. We hadn't really arranged to do it, but we walked into the house. The family was still all asleep one morning, and we just shot it, which is one of the great luxuries of having your cast actually living in location. You can get these kinds of scenes that obviously feel a lot more real of people getting up than if you'd set it all up. And this is a scene that was more set up, but again, I think it's always great if you've got sort of animals and lots of stuff going on. Everyone gets involved in it and you can film it, and things just take on a reality that you don't often get in drama that is so sort of staged and manufactured in the set and so on. There's very little room for spontaneity. So I always try and create things that have an energy about them that will relax the non-actors and also just make the scenes feel more real. This is Duraid. He's actually a quite well-known Iraqi actor as well. And Hiba here too. She was somebody we cast in America because we couldn't get a single Iraqi that we met in Jordan to do this scene. We couldn't get any Iraqis to actually take any of their clothes off or kiss on screen. So we ended up having to cast her in America and then bring her over. Hiba had acted a bit before. She was, I think, had a very small part in The Kingdom, but she's very talented. She was originally born in Iraq but came over to live in America. So it was quite interesting when because she was initially living in with the family in that house, and then I think found it quite tough being with the family. The family had never acted before, so they would sort of do things like trying to leave in the middle of the night with a water heater and that kind of thing, and didn't really realize that the whole film would collapse without them. This was a completely unrehearsed scene too, with Elliot just pissing around, which is what the Marines did all the time, just trying to annoy each other, and they did various other really annoying things that I haven't got in the film. They had a sort of sport of flicking each other's testicles all the time, which got really irritating, particularly when one was trying to... It's a sort of weird thing that would happen, and yet at the same time, the hardest scene I ever shot with the Marines was to actually get them to all take part in the shower scene. So they'd go in for this sort of weird, like, testicle slapping joke all day long, and then had real problems all taking a shower together. It's sort of like a weird thing. Anyway, it was one of the little irritants of making the film. But they were Marines, and I think that's kind of how the Marines amuse themselves when they're in combat and stuff. And this is a typical thing too. It's like, the youngest guy, the guy who's the grunt, who's joined, he gets sort of picked on by everybody, and he becomes the butt of the jokes. At the same time, this is sort of also a kind of affection thing. And he was one of the most popular of the Marines. And so this was the really difficult scene. I almost ended up having to be one of the guys in the showers myself, because what they would do is sort of put towels up between all the showers, and in the end, Haley, the first, had to plead with everyone to get in the shower, and I think it's because of Haley they actually did it. So this scene here is interesting because Elliot, as I mentioned, was very badly wounded in Tikrit. A car suicide bomber came up to his checkpoint and drove through this coiled razor wire, and Elliot got impaled with the razor wire, and this is what happened to him. These terrible wounds here, which in the end got him invalided out of the Marine Corps. Only the Marines didn't really want to look after him and pay for his injuries, which is typical too. And so he felt very let down by the Marine Corps. And an awful lot of Marines who have come back to the States, who often are suffering from, trauma of one sort or another, really receive virtually no help from the Marine Corps. They just aren't interested. Which which is an incredible thought when you think of what these guys have been through. Most of the Marines had joined at the age of 17. They all came from, very poor backgrounds, a lot of them minority groups. A couple of them had joined because they were Mexican and wanted to get American citizenship, and joining the Marines is one way through. This guy, Eric Miakopoulos, who you see here, he was a sergeant in the Marines. He was in Iraq for 5 years. And he was incredibly helpful in terms of training the guys and helping me a lot so I would know what the Marines would actually do. He was a Marine as well, and that's actually a picture of him and his girlfriend. So all these guys are very real, and I think they sort of really got back into being sort of that Marine mentality again.
Get down. There's a window right behind you. Get down.
And this is the kind of training that Marines have for clearing houses,
Just go into a house by yourself.
which was very relevant, really, to what happened that particular day on November the 19th, because in some ways the Marines were just following their training, which is, if you think you've identified an enemy, you then just go and clear the house. You frag it. You throw grenades into the doors. You don't even really look at who's in the rooms. And obviously lots of innocent people get killed that way, but that's the part of the Marine training, which is extremely aggressive. And the rules of engagement allow the Marines to do virtually anything. So, the question is really, what responsibility the Marine Corps should have for what happened that particular day. That's actually me driving that van. That's my one teeny appearance in the red scarf there. The guys who were driving were also terrible. Then the cameraman was obviously strapped onto the hood of the car as we were for that driving shot, and they almost had him going through the windscreen a couple of times. So I ended up having to drive it. I mean, I think one of the things in using non-actors is they tend to be terribly bad drivers and also no real idea about safety. So, one of the disadvantages of not using sort of film vehicles and shooting on trailers and that kind of thing is quite dangerous for the camera people sometimes. But in order to shoot this scene, we had to block off the main road going into the town for about 3.5 days, which made us extremely unpopular with the whole community. It was quite hard getting all these sort of permissions to film here. Jordan's a very traditional country, and we literally had to start with the royal family to get permissions. We used the Royal Jordanian Film Commission, and they are run by Prince Ali and Princess Reem, who were fantastically supportive, but we literally had to go to them, explain what the film was, and then they would talk to the district commissioner and the mayor and so on. And so it was a very long process of actually getting the permissions to shoot the film in the way we wanted to. Here you see him sort of setting the mobile phone to trigger the bomb. This is exactly the way IEDs are planted, sort of just below the surface of the road, not too deep, otherwise it won't actually hit the vehicles. It will just move all the tarmac up in the air. And of course, when an IED is planted, all the people in the houses around the IED will see it going into the road. And they're then in this terrible dilemma of, do we tell the Americans? what do we do about this bomb? Do we try and leave our houses, and they can't really leave their houses because that looks suspicious. If they tell the Americans, they know that the insurgency is going to kill them. If they don't tell the Americans will assume that they're cooperating with the insurgency. So for local people, when they see a bomb going into the road close to their houses, it's kind of almost a death sentence, or it's something very serious, and they really have no way of dealing with it. This road that we use in Jordan looks just like the road in Haditha where it actually happened. The houses were very similar to this. We did a lot of research about the families that were involved in the bombing. One of them was a share, like this guy, which is he worked at the mosque. He would read the Quran. He would wear a dish dash like that, which is the kind of shirt that he's wearing there. So we tried to make it as accurate as we possibly could with regard to the families that were actually in the houses at the time when the bomb went off. We had to reshoot this scene about 3 times because we kept getting Iraqis who would burst out laughing whenever Falah came in with his gun. And I think the only reason this one worked was because these were actually their children. And even though the parents obviously knew that they were acting, the children, I think, were pretty terrified by Falah. And so the scene actually started to work. But, we kept having to get more and more people back to reshoot the scene. And again, this was just an actual location that we found. And it took a lot to negotiate to actually get the right to go up on this roof. The people who owned this building were extremely religious. And none of the local people actually wanted to take part in the film. None of the women would take part in the film. So we had to really ship all our own Iraqi people in, which was, a very big undertaking. Again, these are all Iraqis. This is one of the other houses where we were filming. It was very hard actually to find a lot of the Iraqi people because our Jordanian casting director, Lara, who was fantastic, had only worked with Jordanian people before, and knew Jordanian actors and extras, but didn't know any Iraqis. So we actually had to sort of find these Iraqis ourselves, go into those parts of Oman where there were a lot of Iraqi refugees, and then audition them. We probably auditioned we met probably, 1,000, 2,000 Iraqis, all of whom were recently refugeed from Iraq, and all had amazing stories of what had happened to them. And often we tried to use those stories of what they had experienced in the way that we cast them in the film. These two, for example, had lost a son. He'd literally been cut down in front of them on their doorstep with a machete. And I think when you see her performance later, a lot of her grief and so on comes out in that performance.
ماكشي شكو ماكشي شنو ماكشي هيك الله يطيح حظك احنا جايين نلعب هنا تجيب
And a lot of these scenes too were very much, we'd just put the music on and let them get on with it. They weren't. I would explain, okay, this scene's you're about to go off and do a house search, and you're waiting to be sent out, and I would then just sort of let them get on with it. Obviously, this scene is more set up. It's got very specific dialogue, but except for when there was very, very specific dialogue that had to give information, I would always allow for quite a lot of sort of improvisation. Like, I'd sort of gone over what Elliot was going to say here, but I didn't really tell the other guys, what they should do and so on. So they were just sort of as rowdy as they normally are. And they would just do what they wanted to do. And I didn't control them too tightly. I wanted them to feel that they could do what they wanted to do and they could just be themselves. And I think it's very important with non-actors that they feel they can be themselves and they're not too inhibited, because then I think you can get some great magical moments from them. And again, I think with non-actors, you need to create the reality. You need to make it real. I think if you put non-actors on a film set and there's sort of 100 technicians around them and all that kind of thing, they're totally inhibited and they can't really be themselves, and you need actors then. So this was just a very real location. These vehicles were here all the time around them. Whenever the Marines went into town, they would go in these Humvees, which is how they would do as Marines. So they just sort of got into that reality. It's almost like bringing the method or bringing method acting to non-actors, which is why I think it worked as well as it did. This location was incredible, actually. It was literally the first location we found. We drove around Jordan looking for places. And because it was the first location, at Jerash, I kind of felt, well, I'm being really lazy here. I'm sure there are other locations that are much better. So we actually then spent about another 6 weeks looking at millions of other locations up and down Jordan. Until we eventually came back to this one. So I really should have just trusted my instincts a bit better. It was just the kind of perfect place. The other thing about Jordan is it like a lot of the Middle East, it's so incredibly biblical. It's olive groves, and you just get a sense of all the wars that have been fought there, all the kind of the Crusades and so on. And in a way, the Iraq war that we're fighting at the moment fits in perfectly with that sort of history. It's kind of what the people there have always known. And this is a house search. It's how the guys are trained to do these house searches. One of the things I thought was amazing was that we had this guy called Ali, who you'll see shortly, who's a translator, the Iraqi translator. That's him there. He had actually fought in Fallujah with the Marines as a translator. He had been blown up in IED, very badly injured. Invalided out of the Marine Corps, but was able to give this unbelievable performance because this is exactly what he did all the time. And Ali had actually served with one of the brothers of one of the other Marines. There's Ali, and next to him is Elliot and Nate. It was Nate's brother who had been in Fallujah and Haditha with Ali. So, and this was a guy who was actually tortured. These are the pictures of this guy who was tortured by the insurgency in Haditha. And I didn't allow the actors I didn't allow anyone to see the pictures before. So we filmed them actually seeing the pictures for the first time, which is, I think, why they're so shocked. And Ali, I think, really gave an amazing amount to the reality of the film. He just felt like a real translator. A lot of the translators are in a really vulnerable position, because if the insurgency find out that they're working with the Marines, they'll all be killed. This scene here is a very traditional circumcision kind of ritual that they do in some of the more traditional areas of Iraq, like Haditha. And it looks like we actually circumcised him here, but we didn't. And although I think they would have done it if I hadn't stopped them. And it's extremely, it's a bit like a sort of manhood ritual that you go through, and it can be up to the age of 12 or 13. And the women would all be in one room, like here. The men all in another. It's a very sort of traditional thing. They don't mix and dance together. And I wanted there to be a sort of a love story in this film. I think one of the things we don't know, or we never see about Arab culture, is any sense really of what goes on in their privacy, in their homes, when the veil comes off, and the sort of romance that there is between men and women. It's almost like in the West we portray them as being completely asexual, and yet you're very aware when you're in the Middle East of an incredible sexuality. And I thought it was very important to humanize them, and as that's something I think we really identify with. But it's a very difficult thing to get at. Again, this is one of the night raids that we did. We did a fair number of these night raids until we started to really piss the town off, who were actually incredibly supportive of the film. I don't think we would have got away with anything that we did if we were filming in Europe. It was, I think we were quite disruptive. And I think when we first of all went into Jerash, a lot of the locals thought that we were literally an invading American army that had come to Jordan for the first time. And people were completely stunned. Like, what are the Americans now doing in Jordan? And this was despite the fact we'd put notices out in the local newspaper, and we'd done radio reports and that sort of thing. There was still a lot of people who didn't know what we were doing, and because their reality is so close to this, it got very freaky at times.
Who knows? It's in your fucking house. Who knows?
There's a fucking factory upstairs. You don't know shit about that, huh?
Hey, that's why. Hey, Ali, come here.
I always felt in some of these house raids that the Marines really just got back completely into being Marines, and their energy just, and they really enjoyed doing them. They sort of got completely back into that adrenaline rush of being Marines. So we didn't overly direct them. We really used to let them get into it so that they could get pretty carried away.
وإذا سكتنا راح تتفجر همنا علينا وعلى العالم هاي وحايرين أنت بالله.
I think the thing I kind of enjoyed most about making the film this way is that you're learning all the time from the people. It's a bit kind of almost like making a documentary, because you're working with real people and they're always explaining and showing you their experiences and sharing with you what they've been through. And I think that makes it so much richer an experience in a way than working with your standard actors who obviously probably have never been to Iraq. They haven't haven't fought with the military. They don't know that sort of thing. And it means that you're telling them all the time much more, what to do. Whereas here, it's kind of what I've always done. It's they say, well, we would do this, and this is, and also you're provoking their emotions and their passions in a way which is fantastic and very interesting to do. The other thing I think you have to remember is that the insurgents in Iraq and in places like Jordan are regarded as patriots. They're not regarded as these terrible terrorists the way they're presented in the media over here. It's a bit like, if they were in America, they're regarded in the same way that the people at the Boston Tea Party are regarded. They're regarded as people who are prepared to give their lives for their countries. And I think probably we would be feeling the same way if there was an American army that came and invaded England. People who fought them would be regarded as patriots. One of the interesting things is, when I've shown this film in Jordan, when the film was shown back in Jordan, when the film was shown in Dubai, people were very protective of the insurgents. They felt that these guys were patriots, and people were questioning whether they'd actually want money for what they were doing and that kind of thing. This is based on actual drone footage, what the Americans do. A lot of the war is conducted now by remote control, by fire from helicopters directed from the command headquarters, also by unmanned drones, that kind of thing, which is kind of very freaky. And obviously lots of mistakes are made by people who don't really know what's going on. And oddly enough, there's much less, probably many more people have been killed by the wrong instructions being given to drones than were actually killed on Haditha that day. And, there's very little in the way of inquiries and so on that happens in any of those incidents.
They're fucking with the wrong people. This is the U.S. Marines. Not the fucking Boy Scouts.
Again, this is Ali here, and this is how the prisoners would have been kept. There's a deliberate intention to create a feeling of sort of sensory deprivation with the hoods and that kind of thing, and to shock people, which is why they were treated in the way that they were treated. And this scene that you're about to see here is, I think, one of the more incredible ones that happened, which was, I think, living back in the barracks had made Elliot feel brought back a lot of his dreams and nightmares of actually being a Marine. And on this particular morning, he was complaining of the fact that he couldn't sleep. He was having, very bad dreams. He was thinking about the war. He was remembering some of his friends who had been killed with him and the kind of grief that had caused him. And also the fact that none of them were ever able to get any sort of psychiatric help while they were on duty. So this is, a real scene about something that happened. That, for example, the Marines in Haditha that we talked to, none of them could see a psychiatrist or get medical help for any of their problems while they were actually on duty. They had to wait until they were on leave to see anyone. So of course nobody did. And it was after that we filmed sort of Elliot's breakdown and so on, which you'll see later on in the film. This again is that sort of remote part of Jordan up by the Iraqi border. Then here we are in Jerash. This is all based on exactly what happened in Haditha that morning, which is that the Marines were taking supplies to the army checkpoint, the vehicle checkpoint place. And we talked to a lot of the Marines who were there that day from Kilo Company, and they told us what it was like driving there and so on, and we sort of pretty much recreated it exactly as it was, as indeed the incident. We recreated the incident according to the NCIS report, which goes into enormous detail as to what happened. All the soldiers, for example, who were there at the incident drew stick figure drawings of where bodies were and what happened that particular day. Some of the people actually changed their testimony, which is kind of interesting. But even the details like this of the guy having coffee, they used to sort of eat coffee granules to keep them awake early in the morning. It's all based on what happened that morning. This is also what happened. Safar and Heba were the two main witnesses. And it was early in the morning. All the children were getting ready to go to school. People were getting up. A lot of the people were still, who were killed, were still in their night clothes. It's actually quite cold in Iraq at this time of the year, in November. So people were wearing quite warm clothes. There's no heating in the houses and that sort of thing. This was an amazing scene to stage, because we actually did blow the Humvee up. We didn't want to use CGI. We wanted to make it as real as possible. We wanted to locate it very much in that area with the houses and where all the things that we built up in the rest of the film. The guy who did the explosives, Dave Harris, was amazing, and it took a massive amount of rehearsing, but I think made the whole thing so real. I shot it with about 5 cameras running at the same time. So, for example, a camera here followed those insurgents running down the stairs. So it was all like continuous action. I didn't go and shoot one bit and then shoot another bit, and then, it was all pretty much running simultaneously, which I think really got the adrenaline up and made the performances so much more real than if we sort of stopped and started in a very traditional way. So all this was filmed immediately after the explosion happened. I didn't want there to be a sort of hour wait from after the explosion to this, because everyone was so hyped up when the explosion went off that I wanted to sort of use that spontaneity and adrenaline to get their performances good. But this was actually quite a hard scene to choreograph. There was a lot going on, and there were lots of different variables, and then we also had to relate it back to the base here, and this was sort of much more complicated filming actually than I'd done before. I'd never really done any action as such, but I found I really enjoyed it because there is an adrenaline rush, but also a lot of it is very, very visual. And I felt that it sort of takes film back to its very, very visual form. It's not so dependent on dialogue, really, as a lot of film is. A lot of film, I think, a lot of films we see are very dialogue-driven, and action is quite liberating because a lot of it speaks for itself. You don't need massive amounts of dialogue to explain what's going on. This guy here, actually, this horrible effect, the legs of the actor are in a hole, and then we strap the stomach onto him. And we burnt endless mountains of tires to create this smoke. So I think our carbon footprint was pretty bad. And again, you know, the people of Jerash put up with horrible, disgusting smoke from the tires. We all had, everyone on the crew made jokes about having, getting rubber balls out of their noses. Our faces were all completely black, and a lot of us sort of had a sort of horrible coughs and stuff after we'd been filming this, and then in the houses, which were full of smoke for about a week or 10 days. And this we actually CGI'd the blood on afterwards. This woman is the one who had lost her actual son, so I think a lot of her acting here is pretty, if you can call it acting, is extremely real. And again, because the Iraqis were living in these houses, it was where they were actually living. It wasn't like they were living in hotels. I think the sense of danger and intimidation was so much greater because when the Marines ran in, they were actually they were running into the houses that these guys were living in. And there was a kind of horrible feeling of desolation when we were filming these scenes because, rooms that these families were sleeping in were then sort of, they got wrecked when the Marines came in. So the whole thing was very affecting. It didn't really feel like one was at all making a film or a film set. It was much more threatening than that. Falah actually collapsed after shooting this scene. He got so exhausted, me making him run up and down that hill, that we ended up having to take him to the hospital to sort of get his heart rate down again. And I think for a lot of the actors, this was it was very emotional. The Marines really became Marines again. And they kind of totally loved shooting this kind of stuff. Now this scene is interesting. I wanted Duraid, Heba's lover, was, as I said, he was an actor, but he was very popular with the kids in this family. They're all one family. This is all one family. All brothers and actual sisters. A family of 12. And Duraid was so popular with them because he always used to do conjuring tricks and stuff. And I thought this would be, well, in one of the testimonies actually, one of the guys told the kids stories before the Americans came to try and calm them down. So I got Duraid to repeat one of his conjuring tricks. And you can see here how much this girl really, she was a fantastic little natural actor actually. And I think could have had great, possibilities as an actor. But you can see how much they really got into all the conjuring tricks and stuff.
مبروك جعفر زين تمت الشغله شكرا انا بس اسمع صوت رصاص ما ادري لو ضاع تسوق السوق بالزاي قبل ما تتحسن ان شاء الله تتحسن.
And again, here Mark Wolf, the DP, is actually running backwards with this enormous 750 camera. I wanted to keep it as handheld as possible. In fact, the whole film's handheld. And also I gave him, some direction, but a lot of the time I just sort of, Mark Wolf's very instinctual, so a lot of this stuff is him just following the action, which again I think makes it feel much more immediate and real than if everything's sort of beautifully choreographed and so on and too set up. I think action is very spontaneous, and you need to have that sort of feeling that stuff's going on just on the corner of the frame. It's not like all too well set out. And I think with action, you don't need to keep cutting too much. I think if you've got really powerful action going in front of you, you can just let things play. And actually it becomes a lot more real, which is how we wanted to shoot a lot of these scenes. This scene here was very much based on the witness statement of Heba, who survived, who was hiding actually behind a couch, and who described what happened when the Marines came in. Incidentally, Heba's testimony and Safa's testimony, as with all the other Iraqi testimonies, were ruled out of court as invalid in the subsequent hearings, because they said that they were Iraqis and they had a vested interest in the outcome of the trial. So, which I think is a terrible indication of what the Americans feel about the Iraqis. In fact, all the Iraqi soldiers' testimonies, I think, have been ruled out of court as well. So it's hardly what I would call a sort of fair trial or open trial that's happening at the moment back in America. But there is actually an amazing witness statement done by Heba. A lot of this comes from Heba's statement describing exactly who was killed when, and this is the Heba character, obviously, describing what happened to in our house and what happened to Duraid, her husband. There was in fact a water tank, a gas water tank that burnt in this house like this. So this is all very much based on stuff that actually happened, and that which we then sort of put together. And there was this girl who survived as well. And and then in reality what happened was that Heba escaped with the little boy, went off to another house, and she and Duraid kind of lost each other. Neither of them knew where the other one was. The helicopter actually did come down to take the wounded Marines away. So this was a incredible scene to shoot. I think we had, probably 4 or 5 cameras on this. But again, I was expecting action to be incredibly, difficult to film, but it all went incredibly well, and I really learnt a massive amount doing it as well. There is, in fact, amazing drone footage that was taken on the actual day, which you can find on YouTube. A drone came about half an hour after the guys were shot in front of the taxi, and was there for the rest of the day. And there is some amazing drone footage of later on in the day when they were bombing 500-pound bombs and all that kind of stuff. You can get all that material. And there's a kind of weird eeriness to the drone footage. That's very much based on, again, this guy was shot. This is the second house. The guy was shot through the door. This is all based again on witness statements of what happened. People also hiding under the bed. It's all been very well choreographed, all the information regarding the actual killings and that sort of thing. And interestingly enough, there was a real dislike between the original Iraqi insurgents, who, as I said, were in Saddam's army, and the foreign fighters. And in fact, one of the few successes the Americans have had in the Sunni triangle, because these are all Sunnis, is when they made a deal with the tribal chiefs in the Sunni triangle to take out the Al-Qaeda fighters, which the Sunnis did. They ended up killing most of the Al-Qaeda fighters in the Sunni triangle, which of course the Americans then claimed as a great victory for themselves. But I think, the Sunnis, were very much patriots, and had a real problem with the fundamentalism of Al-Qaeda and the other groups who were coming in. This again is drone footage that we recreated, very much based on stuff that we'd seen. There's a mounds of stuff again on YouTube of drone footage, some from Haditha, some from other places, that is kind of fascinating if you're into that sort of thing to look at. And it's very interesting listening to the conversations between the pilots and the guys back in the control room, and seeing how unbelievably arbitrary the decisions are. So this is, again, very standard procedure, putting hoods over people's heads. And it's part of, the whole sort of sensory deprivation techniques that the Americans have evolved. The same thing was in Guantanamo, where they also stopped people really hearing what was going on, putting earmuffs on, often holding prisoners in the dark for a long time, altering their, times that they have meals, and then suddenly subjecting them to massive doses of light, flashing lights, or very intense music as part of a sort of, I would say, a torture technique, which I think all those things, which we've also learnt about Abu Ghraib, sort of very much undermined any respect and credibility the Americans had in the region. This is very much based on testimony of 3 Marines that I met who told me about their killing Rashid. He was running along a ridge line, and of course, they didn't know Rashid at all, so for them it was a fantastic thing, and they described to me how excited they were when they finally got a bit of action. So this scene was very much, based on that interview that I did right at the beginning of the film, which we recreated. And I suppose more than anything, what you get out of talking to lots of different people is that the war is based on just misunderstanding and confusion and paranoia and people wanting to survive to the next day, that kind of thing. And accidents just happen. Everything kind of spirals out of control to the point where it just breeds more and more dislike between the different groups. In fact, when I was shooting the film, when I first introduced the Iraqis to the Americans, there was a terrible atmosphere. And the guy who showed us how to use the IED, when he found out that some of these Marines had actually been in Fallujah, which is where his brothers were killed, he more or less physically attacked the Marines, and accused them of killing his family and that sort of thing. There was a very ugly situation that happened, and I at one point didn't think we were going to get through the film because these groups hated each other so much. Much more than I expected. And then I realized that in all the time that these Americans had been in Iraq, they really hadn't formed any real relationships with any Iraqis because they were so separated. They got no idea what Iraqis like. They just felt they were all dirty and uncivilized and untrustworthy. And the Iraqis, exactly the same thing about the Americans. And one of the great things about making the film was seeing the two groups actually getting to like each other. They started playing football. Football's a great way of getting people together. And some of the Iraqis were really good at football. And then it was jokes. And then the two groups really started to like each other and are still in touch with each other. And it's amazing how separated they'd really become. This was a really dreadful scene to shoot, and in fact the goat saved me because I was at my wit's end how to make the scene work. Elliot was hating going up and down this slope all the time because of his bad leg from his injury, and it was very hard to get a relationship between the two of them. And then suddenly out of the blue, about 200-300 goats appeared, and I was able to incorporate the goats into the scene, which again gave it some movement and made the scene, brought the whole scene to life, and took the sort of staticness out of it, which I think made a really powerful scene. It was one of the hardest scenes, I think, that I had to do. We left it till right at the end of the film.
You're the last. Is it dead?
What's up?
So how you doing, man?
I'm good, man. I'm good.
Good? You look good. Look like $1 million.
I feel good. Yeah. Get over here.
I think by the end of the second or third day of filming these house searches and stuff, it was really kind of getting to the Marines. They'd sort of really got back into that mind space, filling them full of memories of what had happened in Fallujah and other places that they'd been to. So it became more and more real, really. And obviously we had to shoot most of the film in sequence. We couldn't shoot it out of order. And I think that created a lot of the power. With non-actors, you can't really shoot all over the place. You have to shoot sequentially so that they're in the right emotional place. And I think, Elliot was feeling pretty vulnerable by this time, and he came out with a pretty incredible performance.
And hoorah, Marines! Outstanding job. Cooper Ramirez.
This is Andrew McLaren, who again was a Marine, and then he worked for Blackwater, was in Iraq for quite a long time. He largely came up with the ideas for the speech. I think did a really great job. And all the actors, who had been Marines, they gave each other ranks before we started filming. So they actually kept to those ranks pretty much and formed a Marine group, Marine Corps, both on and off the screen. By the end of the third or fourth day of shooting this stuff, everyone was completely exhausted. On this next shot, you'll see Nate. This guy here, who's gone back to the Marines, he's almost asleep driving the Humvee. It's pretty dangerous. I didn't realise that he was quite that knackered. So I think, the film took on a real reality. Falah, too, was completely exhausted. Nick Broomfield did the music here. He managed to find, that's a duduk, which is, I think it's actually an Armenian instrument, but it's used a lot in Iraq. It's kind of sounds a bit like a clarinet, but it's different. It's played very differently. But I think Nick Broomfield did an amazing job finding and researching music that is a kind of fusion between Iraqi and more Western music. And this next scene that's coming up is the scene I was mentioning earlier when Elliot was really having bad dreams and nightmares and things from the experiences of his war, of his experiences in the war were coming back. And, I asked them, he and Eric, who was a sergeant in the Marines, was a close friend. I sort of set the scene up, but the dialogue and everything that Elliot says is entirely him, and completely based on what he had been through. Elliot was really completely wrecked after doing this scene. It took him really a couple of days, I think, to get over it. But when I asked him about it, he said he was actually pleased to talk to Eric, and it was in a way of getting it out of him and helped him in the long run, although you can see the pain and frustration that he has when you watch the scene.
Nobody fucking understands it either, man. I feel like I'm personally responsible for all those motherfuckers that died underneath me. Every Marine that died underneath me, I feel like I'm personally responsible. Like I could have fucking changed it, you know what I mean? Fucking hate the motherfuckers, the officers that send us in. Fucking hate them!
I think we were all quite worried when this was actually happening, when we were filming it. I hadn't really expected this to happen.
All they fucking give a fuck about is their fucking generals, man! They don't give a fuck about us!
And I witnessed a lot of the Marines freak out at one point or other, either during the filming or actually, when we were showing the film in other cities. Sometimes memories would come back, and often memories of friends being killed and that sort of thing, which was so powerful. And this scene is a scene about the Iraqis grieving from their dead. Again, I didn't know how to shoot it, or how Iraqis would grieve. And I went to, there's a group of women, and I said, who can lead this grieving? I don't know what you'll do. And the woman who I mentioned before, who had lost her son, who had been killed on literally in front of her on her doorstep, she wanted to do it. This is her. And the amazing thing was, all the women in this room, all of whom were Iraqis, they'd all lost family members and stuff. So it became a real grieving scene. It no longer was really, it wasn't acting. So in scenes like this, it really almost felt like one was shooting a documentary again. Obviously, one created the situation, but it had that power.
وأتمنى الأمريكان يطلعون من العراق وينقتلون ويتعذبون.
حبيبتي سمعي، قولي الأمريكان ضربوني بالأخمس على راسي. زين حبيبتي؟ باي على الكاميرا. يلا ابدي.
هذا نموذج من اللي تسويه أمريكا بينا وبأهلنا. هاي طفلة شفتوها.
And this again is what happened. Haditha became an amazing recruiting tool for the insurgency, who were able to channel all the frustration and hatred and unhappiness into fighting the Americans. Haditha is a very, tribal area, and there are many family grudges that last several generations. If one tribe kills a family member from another tribe, it might, they're still paying it back two generations later. And that's, to a certain extent, what the Americans have gotten into, is, they've killed people, innocent people, and their family will pay off that grudge. I think the amazing thing I learnt making the film is that the Marines and the Iraqis were just delighted to talk, because neither group really felt that anyone had expressed their point of view. It was all, this war has been so badly covered in a way, mainly by journalists who never have left the safety of the green zone in Iraq, that they've never really had any voice. I think the Marines feel no one really has understood the trauma they've been through and what a ridiculous war it is and how frustrated they are. The Iraqis, have barely been represented in the Western press. And of all the Iraqi films that have come out of Hollywood, there are really no Iraqi characters in any of these films. They're all told from the American point of view. And I guess that's partly because there aren't any Iraqi stars. And Omar Sharif is now too old to act in them. But I think, we need to understand the Iraqi culture and so on. And the Iraqis, I feel, just think the West aren't interested in them.
It showed the gruesome aftermath of the incident. It also has interviews with some of the survivors. Safa Yunus, 12 years old, is the only living survivor from her family of 9.
I mean, of course, the ridiculous thing about the whole trial of the Marines back in the States at the moment for this massacre is that they're really just taking the fall for a much bigger situation, because I think there have been many Hadithas, that accidents like this or things like this happen every day. And the people that need to be blamed are obviously the architects of the war, the Bushes, the Rumsfeld, the Blairs, all of whom knew when they went into the war that there would be a massive casualty rate of innocent people. I mean, we're up to now 1 million Iraqis dead. And, it's the people who went into the war who, for their various reasons, who really need to face up to this, I think, now. So I think the trial is happening in the States because the Americans need to be, the American military needs to be seen to be doing something, because this incident was so widely reported with the Time magazine article and in the American press. But they'll probably do as little as possible to avoid, the bigger implications of the kind of intentions of the war, which is another whole subject, really. But I think that the way in which the Americans have used the reconstruction of Iraq mainly to get private American corporate investment into the country has obviously alienated the Iraqis probably far more than odd incidents like this. I think it's just the whole way in which the Iraqis themselves have been completely alienated from their own country by the free enterprise system that's going into Iraq that has done the most damage.
Corporal Ramirez, you're being investigated for 13 counts of murder. Corporal Del Cruz?
And the Marines really feel that they're being hung out to dry on this. And I think, quite rightly so.
And Sergeant Ross, 3 counts of murder. Now, it is my job and your job as Marines to protect the reputation, the honor, and the future of this Corps. And I will not have a band of reckless Marines ruin that future.
On the day of the massacre, the Marines did in fact find a boy and a girl hiding in one of the houses. And in an odd way, it's a bit like, when you're in the army, you bombard a town for hours and hours, you kill lots of people, and then you go in and give away lollipops and try and be friends with everybody. And in the same way, they found the boy and the girl, and they suddenly gave them incredible medical attention. They flew them in a helicopter back to Baghdad, to the hospital to receive the best medical treatment. And none of the other people in Haditha could understand, why are you looking after these people so well, this boy and a girl? Why don't you just kill them like you killed everybody else? And of course, the Americans want to remember the good things they've done, and there's a flip side to it. War's all about massively overreacting one way or the other, and it's just what happens when there's a war.
And I guess after a while, you just get hardened. You become numb.
has been hijacked. Not by Al-Qaeda, not by Bin Laden, but by a group of tyrants. That should be of great concern to all Americans.